Hello, everyone. Sloan here with another phenomenal episode of the Free Money Podcast. This time we've got Jed Wheeler from the Manzanita Cooperative coming on board to give us sort of a master class in how industrial agriculture has changed the food system that we rely on to do things like eat and continue living. I won't summarize his points too much. I'm just going to share a clip because I figured out how to do this recently from him, and then we'll get straight into the episode. But before I do that, I just want to share that none of this is investment advice, as usual, and neither from me or Ashby. And we're just here sharing our opinions. We hope you find it valuable, engaging, and fun. And now let's learn from Jed and get right into it.
So there are around 30,000 crops on this planet that can feed humans and that have fed humans throughout history. Right now, depending on whose numbers you use, between 174 and I think 243 are grown commercially in total on this planet.
Here comes the money.
Here we go. Money talk.
Here comes the money. Money, money,
Dollar.
Welcome to the Free Money Podcast. It's the show where we tell you more than you ever wanted to know about long-term investing.
Yeah.
And boy,
Hi.
are we going to inundate you. Get ready.
Get ready for awesome things related to long-term investing.
Yeah, I got a pink flamingo special for this one.
Oh my God, I see that. Yeah, that's rad.
Anybody watching on the YouTubes will be able to see.
I'm going to
our
have to
offices
start because now I realize you're putting these things on the YouTubes. And so I got to upgrade my game.
Yeah, it's you gotta see your office as a set,
I got this for Christmas once. I've never used it. It's it blows cool air on my face, this little thing.
So those neck air conditioner units, the discourse around them has been incredible. Because if you think about a world of climate change, and yet another inadvertent segue for this episode.
Yep.
The first of many, but that's going to be normal, right? It's going to have to be normal.
Oh, yeah.
But it is the most dad core thing you could possibly own.
When I pulled it out and I was like, thank you for this neck air conditioner. I've been thinking about having a personal air conditioning device. I don't know what.
I love to be outside, and now I can be outside in a perfectly controlled way. It's perfect.
Outrageous.
The market solved climate change. Great job.
Oh,
the
fun to be
power. Here. You never thought we'd get there, but we're here.
Nope,
we did it.
The market solved it. It's personal neck air conditioning is all we need.
I bet that's actually a secular growth trend for the next.
You think so? Because to me they look real. I guess people wear Beats, so they kind of have that Beats vibe.
Crocs look dumb, and I'm about as bullish on them as I am on anything.
Oh, you're big on Crocs still. Okay.
I've owned Crocs the whole time. It's my fifth biggest position.
I twisted my ankle in a Croc because there's no support in a Croc. Yeah,
really? I'll
careful.
I'll elevate that to my contacts and management.
Yeah, no, please pass that through your shareholder voting.
Yeah, exactly. Make your Crocs not hurt my friends.
Yeah, exactly. So I've told you, Sloan, but it's been a little bit because I pulled this muscle/nerve compression.
Yep.
And through the process, over a month of being in pain, I had what I think is a decent idea for another segment on the show, which you're not ready for because you don't even know what's about to happen.
I don't need to be ready, baby.
I'll tell you, I've been in a bit of a crabby mood, and there was this moment where I was in a crabby mood, and my wife turns to me and she said, "Why are you so crabby?" And the thing about being crabby and having somebody ask you if you're crabby, it's an immediate trigger to amplify the crabby.
Yep. Yeah, I'm not crabby. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
It's if you're in a bad mood and somebody's like, "Why are you in such a bad mood?" It's it goes over very poorly.
I'm the pinnacle of cheer. I'm the queen of cheer. What are you talking about?
Exactly. So I had this idea in my life. People are always out there talking about trigger warnings and all this crap. Wouldn't it be fun if there was a segment on the show where it's what are things that you see that immediately trigger an actual frustration response?
Oh man.
Because aren't you curious? What is it that triggers road rage?
Oh, So I have this like really weird characteristic, which is that like I don't know if I've told you this actually. I am really bad at talking shit.
Okay.
Like, about like
Yeah.
or getting angry or any of that stuff. Like in one of my lofts, like a roommate moved out. She was moving to the suburbs. A lot of my friends were sitting around talking trash about this person, and I was like, I think she's gonna like the suburbs.
That's not bad though. That's pretty good. That's
Like,
a good burn.
Yeah, right? Like that's an own, but and then I was like, and I'm saying that in a mean way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Just in case we're unclear. So like, I feel like I would just be like, yeah, I mean, people have the traffic is bad sometimes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But let me tell you what I was thinking. So I'm self-aware enough to know that after I got asked why I was in a bad mood and I became in a much worse mood, I was like, isn't that interesting? That like just that little question. And then I was like, where else could we apply that in the world? Like the one that jumped to mind was like, I used to laugh about the idea of cutting somebody off and then sticking the middle finger out my window behind me.
I actually saw that happen on the expressway in Utah. It's insane.
But like, I am clearly in the wrong. But I've chosen to give you the bird.
I saw that exact thing on I-15.
But that I think is how you end up with road rage, right? Like, because the person behind you is like, you're in the wrong.
What are you even talking about? Yeah. Who
nuts.
is this guy? My reaction to that is always just like,
I know.
Wow, right? Like,
I feel bad for you, man. That's the way I think. Yeah, you're having a bad day.
Or just like, man, thanks for adding a little spice to my day.
I know. But do you see like what I'm going for here, Sloan? Is like, what are those little nuggets? We don't need to do any more right now. But
well, I love the bits to be that asshole.
Yeah,
right.
Like what is that horrible thing that people are actually going to trigger other people to get like the true trigger warning? Like, look, I'm going to tell you, you need to brush your teeth right now.
Yep.
Like, you ever say that to another human being?
That is like the piece of feedback that I just like. I cannot imagine ever giving
somebody's
like,
you need to brush your teeth.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my God, you're in trouble.
Yeah, like I'll give really direct feedback on any piece of writing or something like that. But if someone has body odor, like that is, there's a DMZ there.
Sorry to take us down that. I'm not on pain meds right now, Sloan. I promised you I would show up sober, but I have been. It's been horrible. This compressed nerve, it's changed my brain chemistry, I think.
I mean, really, like the gods have it out for the Free Money podcast.
They do.
So this episode was scheduled to happen at a time when I was supposed to be in a quiet place to talk, and then it turned out I was in the arrivals at JFK. Ashby's busting out the heating pad for those who
got my heating pad for those on the YouTube. Yep.
Yes, and get the full HD. But yeah, I mean, we just gotta prevail. We just gotta give it 110% out here.
Oh, we're gonna get them. So speaking of 110%, should I jump into the news?
Yeah, you got any news for me? Did anything happen?
Oh my God, are you ready? Do you know how many emails I've gotten in the last 3 hours about whether or not I would work for the Trump administration?
I was
too many.
If you didn't bring that up, I was gonna put in a new Dear Ashby.
Oh, I know. So for those that don't know,
Ashby's had some weird political leanings. He was rooting for South Korea or North Korea.
North Korea, that's right, in the ping pong against China. Well, speaking of Trump, China, he wants to tax China and use those tariffs to build a new sovereign development fund, what he calls a sovereign wealth fund. And I have to imagine he was at dinner with Jared Kushner and Ivana, and Jared was explaining the PIF, which is his anchor investor in Affinity, his venture capital fund. And Donald Trump then got the idea, and learning about the PIF, to, hey, why not? Next time I'm on stage, let me just say America should have a sovereign wealth fund.
Let's just make one, yeah.
Which is what he did, which is why I keep getting emailed by people. Would you consider working for the Trump administration? Even before we get there, let's talk about the policy. It's talking very similar to what you would see in China, where the Chinese are, using currency sterilization to build this huge foreign exchange reserve, and then they're taking that money and they're investing it globally. What we are talking about doing through Trump is, or what Trump is talking about, maybe not what we are, what we're thinking about him talking about, is taxing imports and then using that wealth to fund projects, development projects domestically. And because he's calling it a sovereign wealth fund, I assume he means investments rather than like government projects. But I'm not sure he knows enough to be nuanced here. But yeah, he's talking about a development fund.
I mean, I don't trust Donald Trump for much, but I do trust him to juice up the speculative qualities of any vehicle that he's associated with. I remember we were talking about why the U.S. doesn't have one of these in like 50 episodes ago.
Yeah.
And you were like, we do. It's the Social Security Trust Fund.
Right. And it's the Alaska, there's state level funds all over the place. We were the first country in the world to have a sovereign fund. It's called a permanent fund. And Texas was the first government in the world to establish it. So when you read the Wikipedia article and it says Kuwait, that's wrong. The Texas Fund was set up in the 1850s. But I think what he's talking about is more like, like a infrastructure bank or something like that, right?
Yeah. And just to, bust a piece of jargon that might be a little confusing when you're talking about currency sterilization with China.
Yeah.
Basically what, China has a controlled economy. When you try and bring money out, you buy something else where it goes through the central bank and they generate foreign currency. Is that the basic mechanism?
That's right. Yeah. Thank you. You know this stuff. I forgot that you were my translator. For a long time, I've been dumbing myself down, but every once in a while, you need to.
Yeah, I can do that for you, man. Don't worry about it. If you haven't tried poppers yet, I can send you some. Those will do it for you when I'm not around.
So I was tempted to spend all this time talking about an American sovereign fund, but really it was just I was like, oh, I better get smart before the pod. It's just a headline. Like he didn't actually say anything, right? Well, so I think we can move on and talk about the real news. But would you work
for the Trump administration? If let's say, I mean, like, it's because it's an interesting question. I mean, like, I can't say unconditionally no, I would not work for the Trump administration.
Oh yeah, I don't know either. So part of me, and when somebody asked me sincerely this question early today, like, would you do it? I was like, look, if he wins, I'm not rooting for him, but if he does win. Wouldn't I I still love this country. Like I'm still going to try to make sure that if we build a sovereign fund, it's the best sovereign fund we can build.
Exactly.
Well governed. So I probably would actually help. I'm not sure I would go work there. I've got a lot of other jobs, but I would probably offer my advice. Yeah.
For your 17th job. Exactly. Like it's, if you have an opportunity to be useful, it's kind of screwed up not to do it.
Right.
Right. But yeah.
But isn't that a hard question? Gosh.
Yeah, I know. It's like, I mean, it's I mean, I don't know. Like I have a lot of contact with the right wing of the United States through various ways. Not least of which is living in Utah. And like out here politics works pretty well and it's deep red. So anyway.
All right. So do I have time for real news or did I run out of time doing
let's do one thing of news and then we'll bring Jed in and we'll talk about why he's here.
First of all, there's a bunch of new sovereign wealth funds I'm just going to rattle through very quickly to say Namibia is setting up a new sovereign wealth fund. Greece is setting up a new sovereign wealth fund. The UK is setting up a new sovereign wealth fund. Speaking of new sovereign wealth funds, this was...
New sovereign wealth fund.
Yeah. All these organizations are setting up sovereign funds for different purposes. It's a fascinating moment, but that's not my news, Sloan. My news is NBIM in Norway announced that they are putting $1 billion into the Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners Renewable Energy Fund. And I literally just wanted to read Nikolai Tangen, who's the CIO, read his quote out because it's such an astute way to think about this. He's talking about sustainability and call it like climate related investment strategies. He said, we think it is part of long-term investing. By the way, I thought about doing the accent, but I'm just going to read it. I'm just going to read it straight.
Thank you for that qualifier. And thank you for not doing the accent.
Yeah. Like if you were wondering why the voice didn't kind of get different, it's because I'm not, I'm not good at the accent.
You're not going to do the Swedish chef talking
No. Okay. We think it is a part of long-term investing. You really need to care about the impact that companies have on the environment. Otherwise, you're not going to make long-term investing. You're not going to make good long-term investments. So that's important. And we think the fact that some other people are pulling away right now gives us a better opportunity to phase in. So really, these are interesting times for us. So it's like, as all these American pension plans are pulling out, guess what?
Yep.
Nikolai's going in.
And it makes so much sense. Like, especially in Europe, like we didn't have any European positions a year ago, pretty much. Like we had maybe one. Now it's probably 20% of my book.
Oh, really?
Yeah, if not more. And like the valuations over there, like, and the indexed nature of the world means there's all kinds of companies being left for dead that are really quite interesting. And like, so yeah, I mean, by the way, plug for the Nordis Bank YouTube channel.
Yeah, I haven't checked it out.
One of the best investing YouTube channels out there.
No kidding. Okay.
I'll
check it out.
And with that, I think it's a natural segue to another plug. We've got Jed Wheeler joining us, who is the founder of the Manzanita Cooperative.
Yes.
Jed, wow, you're outside. You got a tree behind you.
Oh my gosh. Good to see you, Jed.
Very agriculture.
Good to see you as well.
Yeah, I mean, thanks so much for joining us. I think, you and I caught up a couple of weeks ago and we sort of chatted about what you're up to, which is super exciting and a great window into thinking about how all kinds of activities have to change in a world of climate change.
Yeah.
And how many times can we say change in one sentence?
A lot of change. You got to change the way you talk about change.
We do actually, though, have to change the way we talk about change.
Thank you.
Because
pick it up what I'm putting down.
We're talking about change don't actually change much.
That's so real. So real. And, I think, you gave me this kind of mind-blowing history on how the crops we grow have shifted over the last millennia.
Oh, yeah.
Right when we started chatting. So like, maybe that's a good place to start us off. Like, is what we're doing now natural, and how did we get here?
So there are around 30,000 crops on this planet that can feed humans and that have fed humans throughout history. Right now, depending on whose numbers you use, between 174 and I think 243 are grown commercially in total on this planet.
That's it.
Yeah. And the reason for that is industrial agriculture in the Green Revolution. And it's a really recent change. That's the biggest reason. Going back further, colonization, as humans spread across the planet, they found local species everywhere that they went, and they adapted. And up until very, very recently, a few hundred years ago in human history, the foods you would eat in one part of the world were, of course, dramatically different than the food you would eat anywhere else, because it was all based on their local crops. Now, there are some exceptions to this. Crops spread along trade routes. So apples originally come from Kazakhstan, for example. Peaches come from East Asia as well. And these crops end up in Europe through trade and the exchange of seeds, and people find something. So oranges comes from the Spanish word naranja. Oranges were brought to Spain by the Arabic influence that they came in and conquered Spain for many, many years. And so we have oranges in Western Europe thanks to that cultural exchange. And of course, when Europeans exploded outward, well, not all Europeans, specific European countries, the English, the Dutch, the Spanish, and so on, who first conquered their neighbors and then went out to conquer the rest of the world, they encountered new crops, which dramatically reshaped food systems everywhere they went as well. Chilies, for instance, are native to the Americas. Can you imagine Indian food without chilies?
No.
Exactly. And
amazing.
They were introduced to Indian cuisine and to cuisine in the rest of the world by those trade relationships. So half of the crops that are eaten in the world today commercially and grown in the world today commercially are native to the Americas. So, you go and you watch The Lord of the Rings and Sam Gamgee wants to eat potatoes. Well, nobody in Europe in antiquity was eating potatoes because they're native to Peru. Right?
Yeah, because they're not America, and we're number one, obviously.
Right.
But aren't there like 60 types of Peruvian potatoes or something? There's a huge number.
So many. Yeah. And so that's actually a really important point, because in the places where these crops come from, you have a massive diversity of the crop, and then in places where they've been adopted, you start to see diversification as well. But what you get when we get to the Industrial Revolution is a centralization of food systems and a standardization of food systems for a number of reasons. But it really comes down to what crops would grow really, really well with intense farming, using chemical fertilizers, using chemical herbicides, using chemical pesticides, and tractors in monoculture. And so those crops are the crops that the world ends up standardizing on in the last 100 years. So 3 of them in specific, wheat, rice, corn, are more than half the calories consumed by humans on this planet. And so soy, for instance, 3/4 of the plant-based protein consumed on this planet, not just by humans, but by livestock as well. And so what that means is that those 4 species, anything happens to any of those species, we are in a really, really bad place. And it's not like there isn't strong historical precedents. So the Irish famine in the 1840s, anybody like me with ancestry that comes from those Atlantic islands understands what that meant. 1/3 of the population starved to death. 1/3 of the population was forced to emigrate. And I mean, it wasn't a famine in real terms. The English were taking food out of the country at gunpoint all through the famine. Ireland was a net exporter of food all through the famine. It was genocide committed via free trade. But the proximate cause of it was the collapse of a non-native species, potatoes, which had been introduced by a colonizer, so that they could let the Irish grow potatoes, which grew well on the poor soil that was left over, and export all of the food that they wanted, all of the wheat and the corn and the rice, and well, not rice, but the grains and other things that they wanted to grow in Ireland. And so the Irish got potatoes because that's what you could grow in the land that was left over after the colonizer had everything they wanted. And then that non-native crop hits a blight, and suddenly it's gone. Mass starvation. Another example, the chestnuts that used to blanket North America and were such an incredibly important source of food, not just for indigenous people, but for the settler population as well, all over eastern and midwestern United States. Chestnuts were almost completely wiped out in the space of a very few years by a blight. Now, a blight like that shows up for corn. What happens when, or wheat or rice destroyed? Think about what that means. And unlike Ireland go ahead.
And Jed, in their native context, like let's say the Peruvian potatoes are growing with 60 other varieties. Maybe a blight hits, and some varieties do better, some varieties do worse. The species as a whole evolves. But when we're talking about one species, we're literally talking about one species, one seed strain in specific. A lot of the time, right? So,
or at least a dramatically reduced number. So there's more than one strain of rice being grown globally, but there's far fewer than there was a century ago. In one country, in India, you had hundreds, maybe thousands, I don't even know, number of strains of rice, all genetically distinct with tremendous biodiversity within the species. And the commercialization of farming and the standardization of farming, because of the pressures of industrial agriculture onto not just a tiny number of crops, but a tiny number of strains of those crops, to your point, Sloan, has really created tremendous vulnerability in our global food systems. And that's before you.
I just feel like I just need to point out that this is starting to sound like the movie Interstellar. I don't know if you've seen that.
I have. I don't remember the linkage there, but
well, you're talking about shrinking number of crops, blight hitting. Like you asked, what happens when corn, has a blight? Like what? And in that movie, the whole story is we have to get off planet because we have consolidated all of our crops into a single, set of crops, and then blight hits. And so that's why, Matthew McConaughey goes into a black hole.
Well, that I had forgotten that part of the movie, but yeah, I mean, that's very prescient. And it's not just some fringe thing that people are worried about and talking about. Like the UN is talking about this. The World Economic Forum is talking about this. Bloomberg magazine published an article a couple of years ago talking about this, how we desperately need to diversify our crops. USAID in Africa, which up until very, very recently, for decades, has promoted, the crops that Americans grow in Africa, has just in the last 12 months started shifting to promote local indigenous African crops. So there is definitely a shift in a movement. People are starting to realize this is a problem. But it's getting worse and worse. And it's getting worse and worse now, not just because, there was a phase of consolidation around, global homogenization and during colonization, suddenly the same crops are being grown all over the world. But then we shrink down we get to the Green Revolution and we shrink down to, okay, only the varieties of those specific crops and a much smaller set they can grow in industrial agriculture. And now we're shrinking down the genetic diversity even further with genetic engineering, because you genetically engineer a crop. Oops, that was an apple just fell out of my tree onto my head.
That is so pastoral.
Oh my gosh.
Of you.
You got to
That is
invent
so-
something today, like gravity.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude, I know you're not like coming in here trying to present a branded image, but you're presenting a branded image. That is very branded of you.
This is just my life, man. But what I was saying, with genetic engineering, you take a single strain of rice or tomato or whatever it is, and you eliminate all of the biodiversity that exists even within that strain, because now you're producing the seeds in a lab setting. And so there's this movement to like, oh, we'll deal with climate change, and preserve biodiversity by sinking all of our money into genetic engineering, which will let us do more intense farming so we can stop, agriculture and for growing population from wiping out what's left of wild spaces. And there's actually a really big venture capital fund that bills themselves as a fund for biodiversity, that this is their strategy. And it's insane because it wipes out all of the biodiversity in the crop. It wipes out all of the natural resilience to pesticides or to anything else, and you're left with a very, very narrow band of adaptability for the crop. And it ignores the fact that if we were just using the crops that are native to each of our bioregions, well, suddenly you're not competing with wildlands as habitat. Suddenly your farm can be habitat. If you're growing the locally native crops that are evolved from your locally native species, then your locally native pollinators know what to do with them. And all of the other knock-on effects of a food system that's integrated into the natural world. And we're just running away from that right now with our current global program.
And that's before we get to this climate, which I hear is changing.
There's some stuff about that.
You heard anything about that, Ash? Oh, yeah,
I've heard about it. Yep.
So again, not some fringe thing. Everybody knows that it's happening. Even the state of California has guidelines out saying, oh yeah, we're going to lose 10% of our water at least over the next decade. And they know which crops are going to be most heavily affected. In places like California, tomatoes, almonds, walnuts, stone fruits in general, wine grapes, these crops are all at risk as the climate changes. Well, I just described most of California's most valuable.
Yeah.
And globally, if we look at the crops that are endangered, NASA says a quarter or a 25% approximately reduction in corn yields in the U.S. predicted by the end of this decade. Well, corn is kind of our biggest crop in the U.S. by a huge margin. Rice, we're already seeing global shortages due to crop failures across South Asia, and those are expected to spread. This last year, we had shortages of sugar and chocolate due to massive crop failures. They ran out of cocoa beans on the Ivory Coast because climate change is messing up supply lines. Coffee, another highly crop, and so again, wheat, rice, corn, half our calories. Well, rice is already seeing massive crop failures. Corn is on the chopping block. Wheat is likely, depending on whose numbers you use, to either decrease slightly or increase slightly. It'll probably be relatively all right because of the places where it's grown. Russia is one of the biggest producers of wheat in the world, and things getting a little warmer in Russia wouldn't hurt the wheat yields there, but it's not enough of an increase to offset the losses in other crops. So we're in a place where we can either go down the route of let's hyper-specialize onto incredibly bioengineered crops that have no genetic diversity and are strong but brittle. Let's use that metaphor. Or we can do something else and maybe start diversifying our food supplies again. Is what I'm working on.
Yeah, and I also just want to bring into this conversation that I just saw the Farm Bureau is forecasting declines in double-digit declines in farm income through the end of the decade. Which for anyone is bad, but for a finance dork who knows that farms sit on top of leverage upon leverage, in many cases, like the bottom line impact of that top line decline could be disastrous in a lot of communities.
Absolutely. Yeah. Our farmers
So,
are in
so are you
shape
like
in America.
so like what's your cunning? You have a cunning scheme.
Yeah, I was gonna say, when does
Cunning scheme.
if this is a hero's quest, like hopefully this is Empire Strikes Back here, and we're about to get to Return of the Jedi.
Yeah, you know, that's the hope.
Okay.
So what we're doing, we've got a grant from the National Science Foundation to develop a new dry land protein crop from a native species that grows all across the western United States. This is a species that has analogs that have been successfully domesticated and eaten for many thousands of years in other parts of the world. But our locally native Californian and western U.S. species have unique drought adaptations. And this is sort of the pilot for one half of our approach. Okay. Our core thesis is that native plants are highly adapted to a much broader range of climates than our conventional agricultural crops. B, an underutilized resource, and C, worth investigating. I think that's a fairly simple and straightforward value proposition. It's been described to me by others who I've shared it with as an obvious thing that no one has thought of, essentially. And so, or a no-brainer that no one has brained, I think was the specific phrase that jumped into my head. And so we're trying to find ways that we can develop new crops from these high potential native food crops, many of which have been eaten for thousands of years, that are adapted not only to the climate that we have now, but to the climates that we're likely to have in the future. So, for instance, our native legume, there are subspecies and species that are adapted to every climate from the temperate rainforests of Northern California to the deserts of Southern California. And so as the climate changes, okay, maybe we're not growing the species that was in this county, 200 years ago, but we can grow to the species from the county to the south or the county to the north, depending on how the climate changes in each microclimate. So taking advantage of that massive biological diversity. And as a bonus, this particular species happens to be a keystone for our native pollinators, including a number of endangered species. And wild populations have been plummeting because it grows in open grasslands, which were targeted for conversion to farms. And so by bringing this native species back to the farm, we're essentially reintroducing it to its native habitat and reintroducing the food needed to support native pollinators and the whole web of other creatures that exist on top of that framework. Because, it's one thing to say, yeah, we're going to create habitat for a lot of bugs, but you can't have birds without bugs. Birds can't lay eggs if they don't get the protein that they need, and they can't get the protein without bugs. Even hummingbirds, 70% of their diet is insects. So if you want to preserve biodiversity, the entire web of life, you have to start at plants and bugs. And so we're finding crops that can support and benefit from even those native bugs, instead of a monoculture of non-natives drenched in herbicides and pesticides that kills everything and then drains into the river and kills everything there.
Well, but what about the acorns though?
Yeah. So acorn is our second crop. So I said there's two parts. The first part is targeted domestication of new crops using gene-informed rapid breeding. So it's not genetic engineering, but we test it each generation so that we can do in 3 to 5 years what used to take 100 years to domesticate a new species. And that's huge. We're the first company to use this gene-informed rapid breeding approach, which has been used successfully for crop improvement. We're the first to use it for crop domestication. So that's part A. The second part of the solution is that there are a large number of crops that don't actually require any breeding. They just require new agronomic systems, new economics and how to harvest it and how to process it and how to sell it and how to bring it to market sort of systems in order to make them economically viable. And the most obvious of those is the acorn. Now, humans have been eating acorn for at least 780,000 years, according to the archaeological record. And to give you context, that's more than twice as long as modern Homo sapiens have existed. So,
wow,
our bodies.
And I have never eaten one. I'm pretty sure. I can say with some, have you? Yeah, I couldn't say I've ever eaten one.
Yeah, you can buy it in a grocery store because
you never had acorn ravioli or anything like that. I've had that. I'm saying for real.
Yeah, it's good.
You're laughing at my acorn ravioli, but it's good.
Your California is showing, Monk.
That's true. You know what? In California, the Native Americans here would acorns was like a whole thing. I've got
It was
like a
half their
million
diet.
acorns outside.
Yeah, acorn was on average about half the diet of your most
Yeah.
indigenous.
Yeah. So when you're a kid in California, you like make acorn bread and you like, at preschool, which I've done.
Yeah.
It's good. It's hard. Boy, it's hard to like work
It's
acorns,
a lot
by
of
the
work.
way.
You got to leach them out, get rid of the tannins. Now, the good news is that machinery exists to do almost the entire process and do it at scale. The thing is, nobody's done it in California, which is absurd because we have the best food grade acorns in the world. So acorn is eaten in Morocco. It's eaten in Greece. The Italian government is starting to bring it back in a larger way. It's been like a small niche regional food, but they're pumping money into bringing it back in a bigger way. It's eaten in Spain and Portugal, but the place it's eaten most of all is Korea and China. Korea has a well-established acorn industry. Korean acorn jelly is delicious. It's a delicacy. And China actually has recently sort of taken over the acorn industry by undercutting the Koreans on price. And so now the Korean acorn crop gets processed or shipped to China to be processed, mostly in Wuhan, and then shipped back. And as well as, China has its own acorn harvest. And then that's getting shipped all over the world now. So there is, it's out of that list of 174 crops that are being eaten, acorn is on that list. So it's already in the top, like, tiny fraction of a percent of, crops. It's just not grown here because of colonization, more or less. And because it's resource intensive and in terms of just machinery and capital intensive to do it well. You can process acorn entirely by hand and make really, really nutritious, delicious food. My son, my 6-year-old, for his birthday, I asked him, what do you want to make? I'll make anything. I love to cook. And he asks me for my acorn polenta. It is good stuff, but you can't buy it in any grocery store. So we want to change that. We want to put acorn in your grocery store along with a whole range of other native foods that are going to be sustainably harvested with permission from landowners. And our factory, which we hope to launch in the coming year here in Northern California.
Yeah, gosh, Ashby, you look like you're going to say something.
I'm just excited. I was just gonna I'm just any new, fun, delicious food. I mean, I love heirloom tomatoes. I love all of this stuff that feels like it's connected to nature.
Yeah,
like this
tomatoes
notion of terroir.
Native, crop, by the way. They're native.
What's that?
Tomatoes are also native to the Americas, so they're
are they?
They're native.
Yeah. Well, if you go get a tomato salad at my mom's house, she'll have like the old. It'll look like it was out of a horror movie because of the heirloom tomato style. But they're amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, if you go down into Mexico, there's a whole range of native wild type tomatoes and a whole set of biodiversity there that's being largely ignored by the agricultural industry. UC Davis has a bunch of their seeds on stock apparently, and we may do some work with that at some point in the future to develop climate adapted tomatoes from natives. But right now,
one of the things that I think is really interesting about what you're doing, though, Jed, is that you're doing all this science and technology development. Yeah. You're building a factory. You're harvesting acorns, and most peculiarly of all to those that are kind of used to the way that people in California do things, you're not doing it by raising venture capital. You're doing it by organizing a worker-owned cooperative.
That's true.
And like, I mean, that I think is something to dine out on as a construct, because it's easy to see the role that something like that plays in a credible solution to an agricultural problem, but also easy to see that it doesn't neatly match up to the funding ecosystem.
Yeah.
For these sorts of things. So how's that been going?
That's one of our big problems is the entire funding system for new businesses is based, if you're talking venture capital, it's based on build something as big as possible, as fast as possible, as much revenue as possible, and then exit because the VCs want their money back. Well, this isn't a solution that you exit from. This is a solution that you continue with over time. And so that's, there's been some degree of misalignment with VCs that we've spoken to. And also just the fact that you can't patent acorn. Now, we've got some, I think, compelling trade secrets around the processing of acorn. We've done a lot of work to make that processing, and particularly the leaching process, more efficient. We've got some intellectual property around things that we can do with the tannins, which is, of course, the main waste product from acorn. But VCs really want something that you can puff up, get a big exit, they get their cash, they walk away. I want to build something that endures. One of the reasons we chose the Manzanita as our namesake is Manzanitas are slow growing. They can take up to 20 years before they produce berries. And they also, reseed after a fire. And so we want something that is sustainable over the long term, because the way I see it, one of the big problems in our global food system and just society in general is that all of our solutions, the solutions that are determined to be viable, are the solutions that can make a bunch of money for an investor quickly. Not necessarily the solutions that do the most good for society or solve the biggest problem in the best way for people as a whole or for our planet as a whole. It's the solutions that can make a lot of money for an investor quickly. That's what gets funded. And while we're going to be very, very profitable if our numbers are even in the ballpark, the exit strategy for an investor who wants us to immediately sell off the company, and go public or be acquired, isn't really there. And it's not really aligned with our mission, which is to create lasting change in food systems, right? So at the point where we're going to have to bootstrap this thing anyway, I wanted to give the equity in the company to the people who we're bootstrapping with, and to community organizations that are supporting us. So, for instance, the California Indian Museum and Cultural Center is our first external shareholder, and their executive director sits on our advisory board and has been just tremendously helpful in helping us build relationships with tribal communities, which I think is tremendously important when we're dealing with a traditional crop that has been safeguarded by indigenous people for thousands of years. There's intellectual property there, whether the law recognizes it or not. And so we need to approach that in an equitable way. And that's something that we wouldn't have the freedom to do if we were owned by a hedge fund, and so having the company be owned by the team, by the people who are making it happen, and by our community partners is, I feel like, a really core part of our mission.
Makes like Ash, what do you think about that? Like the
Love it. I mean,
Yeah.
look, the cynic in me is like, we can find, like, the whole job in my life is finding you the capital that aligns with your project, right? And so, like I'm like, you're daring me to find you the right investors, but.
As a cooperative in California, we can sell up to 40% of our equity to community investors. And so
Right.
we have equity set aside to sell to investors if and when we find that right mission-aligned investor.
Yeah.
Gosh, if you know somebody, please. I would love to talk.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, this was like the work I did around climate change and nature as an asset class. This fits into these worlds where we are in the active process of trying to think about, okay, where do we find capital to fund society's projects? And yeah, my name of my research center is long-term investing, because some of this stuff takes 2 decades to materialize.
Yeah.
But if you really are generating huge profits 2 decades from now, then there should be an investor out there that's willing to partner. It just, it takes, we need to help you tell the story in a way that they understand, and we need them to like hear your story in a different light. And then it's not easy.
No.
Yeah, I think like it's, whenever I come across these interesting projects that are structured as cooperatives, I'm like, if it was 10 years from now and the funding environment already existed and the co-ops could reinvest, like, the VC ecosystem came out of people making companies and getting exits.
Yep.
To some extent, right?
Yeah.
And like the cooperatives that are large in the US don't have like strategic finance capacity necessarily to go and say, oh yeah, we want to be pooling our capital into other stuff. But it's an interesting case in point of like, okay, here's this thing where the organizational structure allows it to do a thing better than the other thing, but that also makes it, have hair on it,
Yeah.
right? From an investor standpoint, which, bless you, Jed, for, fighting that fight.
But there's also a movement for proactive investment strategies that get ahead of the next crisis.
Absolutely.
So instead of investing in vaccine makers for the next COVID, you invest in, the like ways in which we can avoid pandemics from taking off. I don't know. I got ahead of my analogy. I didn't have a good answer. But in this case, I'm sure there's investors, whether it's food or agriculture investors, that it's like, look, this is about getting ahead of these tail risks.
Oh, absolutely.
You could be a hedge. So like you're poo-pooing the hedge funds, but who knows? Maybe you're a hedge for a food-based hedge fund.
So that's where I'm at right now, is I'm trying to find those people, because we've managed to do a lot based on grant funding.
Cool.
There's sort of a tendency in the VC world to be like, oh, government, blah, 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 blah. But so far, government granting agencies, the National Science Foundation notably, are the only ones who have the vision to jump into this. And we've got some grants out to the USDA as well, some grant applications out to the USDA as well, and some other programs also. But we can't do what we need to do without some additional funding. And so I am trying between now and early next spring to put together the rest of the pieces that we need to put together that processing pipeline for acorns, so that by this time next year, I'm on track to put acorn into your local grocery store, which I think is entirely feasible, and it's been done. Marcy Mayer did it in Greece, starting in 2015. There's a TED Talk that she did talking about acorn and her process there. And there's, as I said, it's an established crop in a number of other countries as well. So we know that acorn is a viable crop because it's been done. It's just not been done here. So,
and it falls from trees that already exist in a lot of cases, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And so the challenge is, how do you get the stuff?
So our approach has been creating harvesting agreements with landowners. There's a lot of people who have just huge chunks of land, particularly in Northern California, that somebody inherited from somebody. And those lands are slowly being sold off because they don't generate revenue and the property taxes are expensive. And as they get sold off, they get cut and they get turned into farms, and they get turned into suburbs and whatnot. And so California's oak forests have been shrinking and shrinking and shrinking year over year, to the point where many of our species our oak species are endangered, which has just cascade effects across the rest of the ecosystem. Our oak forest is the equivalent of a rainforest in terms of biodiversity. And so what we're doing is we're working with those landowners to say, hey, give us harvest rights to the acorn. We'll take half, we'll leave the other half for wildlife. And we'll do biodiversity monitoring in the process. We'll take that acorn, we'll process it, we'll sell it. We can be profitable. You can have the revenue you need to keep this land intact over time. And so directly stopping deforestation by doing sustainable, highly monitored harvesting in existing wilderness. And then over time, as we expand beyond what we can harvest on those lands, and there's a lot that we can harvest there. There's millions of tons of acorn that rot on the floor of the forest every year, unharvested in California. And once we get beyond that, we start buying up, former oak forests. There's a large area of Northern California and Central California that's former oak forests. Many of which those farms have been abandoned now, or fire has made them uninsurable for the houses that were there. And so if we can replant those forests and restore habitat over time, we can not only stop deforestation, we can reverse it. And of course, forests are an incredibly effective way to, take carbon out of the atmosphere as well.
Yeah, so I hope there are some folks who are like, wow, this is cool. I want to subscribe to your email newsletter, etc.
Yeah.
ManzanitaCooperative.com. Manzanita spelled MANZANITA. Before we let you go, I want to ask, one of the big themes of this podcast is, everybody sticks around for the gardening tips.
Oh, yes.
And we can't, in good conscience, we can't let you depart without giving us some guidance as humans/gardeners about what we should do with our lives.
Well, so gardening, you can grow all of your conventional garden crops. Actually, Manzanita came out of an experience in my own garden where we had a drought a pretty intense drought here on the coast, and my well ran dry, and I had to stop watering my vegetable garden. And I noticed that all of my veggies, my non-native veggies, died, and all of my native food plants survived. So depending on where you are,
Amazing.
depending on where you are, you can find not only native plants for your garden that will provide habitat, but native food plants that can feed your family. CalFlora is a great resource for that. The California Native Plant Society has a number of great resources for that. Here in Northern California, I'm very, very partial, of course, to manzanitas. The manzanita berry processes very neatly into it's somewhere between sugar and flour in terms of its sugar content. It can be used as a natural sweetener. It's delicious. Our native currants are delicious and amazing, and of course, highly climate adapted. We have a native hazelnut that I have a bunch of those growing in my yard, and on and on and on. And so finding, what's native to your microclimate and provides food can be a really fun thing to do, and a way to climate proof your own garden while providing some habitat as well.
And man, the way that those insects just show up when you plant that native
It's amazing.
Yeah. My first year here, when I moved into this house, I made a point of planting food for our native hummingbirds, not just the things that they want to eat, but the things that are hosts for the insects that they want to eat, right? Because as I said, the majority of their diet is actually insects. And people don't believe me, but I have more than once been on a conference call and had a hummingbird fly into my house through an open window because they love my yard and they hang out all around my house. It's become an oasis. And it's noticeable just walking down the street. There's, lots of big open lawns. And then there's my yard, which is full of wildflowers and native species. And hummingbirds darting around, and you can hear the sound of the bees as you walk by my yard. And it makes a difference. And we share this planet with so many other species, and they have just as much right to live here as we do. And it's not hard to share our homes and our yards in a responsible way and create that habitat. There's a really big movement to do that in our yards, native gardening. And so in a real way, I see what I'm trying to do with Manzanita as just the next logical step in taking that, rewilding that native gardening into the farm.
Hell yeah.
I love it. Thank you for sharing that.
Preach. Thank you so much for educating us, educating the listeners. Hopefully everybody has some nice fires under their asses to go out and plant some wildflowers. And by the way, the fall is the best time to start.
Well, yeah. October and November is when you want to plant your California natives.
The
rest of the country may be under snow, but this is when everything puts its roots down.
Well, long distance high five to you, Jed. We'll
Thanks,
leave
Jed.
you in your pastoral snow white paradise. And yeah, catch you soon.
Thanks for having me.
That was awesome.
Let
me just tell you. So if you go into my backyard right now, we have so many acorns on the ground. I was like literally this week getting nervous that my dog was eating too many. Like he's just going around being like num 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 num, eating up acorns, and I'm like, dude, I don't know exactly if you're supposed to eat this many acorns, but in his brain, he knows to like eat the acorn.
Yeah, and I feel like it's funny, like when we talk about like these commitments that the big funds make to like climate solutions and stuff like that. Like I find that there's my firm used to be called Invest Vegan. We did a lot with food systems, right?
That's right.
Even groups like FAIR, which did great work estimating it's FAIR, estimating the spillover cost and crisis cost of like animal agriculture en masse. Like when they go to have a conversation with the industry is like, well, okay, so that's like 30 basis points of risk, whatever, and it got hip to talk about biodiversity and pensions for a while. But the imaginative task of like, here's the thing that can be done to test this out, often arises in an ecosystem that's alien to most allocators, most capital providers. And it seems like this, it's like, I'm getting really interested in these cooperatives, in part because I just keep getting shanghaied into fun projects, but that's like That's your secret, right?
Yeah, no, I just say if it's close, I say yes to what I want to do.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, you want to talk to me? Sure. Yeah, whatever.
yeah.
But like, it just is. It, I hope that we get some kind of structure or support system or whatever. Because like there are at least 40 cooperative projects on my radar.
Whoa.
That are, like I think Manzanita would be one of the smaller of them.
I got to read you in, and I guess I'll now read the listeners in too, but I got to read you into this project we're doing on nature as an investable asset class, which
do.
Which involves a very broad definition of nature. And one of the words we use a lot is biodiversity. And so what we're trying to think through in the same way that if you go back 25 years, like people were like, what do you mean investing in a bridge? Like, and you're going to buy a road. And now it's like there's $1 trillion invested in bridges and roads around the world. And it's become an amazing part of pension portfolios because of the inflation protection, the recession proofing, all that stuff. It might not be COVID proof, as we learned, but there's other things that it helps you manage. And as we look at nature, whether it's oceans or air or regenerative ag or timber, there's got to be a role in investment portfolios for these assets. Yeah. And we just learned a story where there's like, there's a whole tail risk movement you could do around these crops and blight. And you really should go rewatch Interstellar after that conversation.
It's Friday night, and
go put it on. You'll see.
Yeah,
they end up living, in space because of what he talked about. Like, we couldn't live on Earth anymore. So, anyway, it's a really fun time for us to be thinking about how people like Jed get the funding, because like he's at the tip of the spear. I'm going back to the base of the system to be like, hey, is there a role for this stuff in institutional portfolios? Yeah. Does it just impact investors, or could a pension with a 75-year time horizon have this meet their fiduciary standard? And I think there's a story here that says it does meet the standard, but we need to do some more work.
I mean, our highest impact positions have been the highest sources of return, and in particular, like our ag lending position has driven a lot. I mean, it's like, it's straightforward. It just means departing from your S&P 500 index, right, accepting tracking error, which is the whole hard thing that we made this podcast to do, is like talk people into taking career risk and doing something weird.
Exactly. That's exactly it. Like, we want you to go do some innovative thing. We also want you to find free money. And I think the idea that I can pick up my acorns off the ground and sell them to Jed.
I mean, that's literally what he's pitching.
Literally, he's like, I'm just trying to get people to give me their acorns, and I'll be like, I have like 3 big oak trees on this hill of
go
mine.
Wild.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like it's California's agricultural system has some of the best laborers in the world. It's a big part of why it's so efficient, and why even in similar climates you can't, kind of do this. So it's like California feels like the absolute perfect lab for these sorts of experiments, right? I mean, isn't agriculture like its biggest export?
It's a huge I'm not, we're the 5th biggest economy in the world still. Like, California sits between Japan and India. And so I'm not sure if ag is as big as tech, but it's massive. Like, I mean, the Central Valley is like nuts.
Ag. Anyway, there's plenty more to talk about.
There sure is.
I'm sure we'll revisit it, but what's going on in your life? What's been hard for you lately?
Oh, the hard thing. So for me, it's just being injured with all of the commitments I have. So like, I didn't take a day off, and I had like nerve pain all the way down my arm into my hand. It's gone now, but being injured and in pain, dude, that's I think that was the first time in a while where I was like, I really want to take some days off. And then I looked at like the commitments I'd made and I was like, oh my God, like I actually just need to keep going.
And yeah, and the thing that sucks about kind of pursuing this like intellectual risk life is that it actually matters a lot to you if you have to reschedule.
Yeah. Yeah. Like even this very podcast that we just did, we rescheduled it and we managed it. It was going to go to October because my life is so crazy and somehow we got it in now. I'll have to thank CS for that. But
yeah, we got to give him a producer credit on this podcast.
Yeah, no, for sure. I thought for a second he was going to give us shares in his company and that was going to be the free money hookup. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, so my like depraved finance chick theory here is that like, I look across all of these worker-owned cooperatives. They all have real estate assets. Like that's their unifying characteristic. And usually not much debt.
Right.
Right. So like I think there's capital out there among the cooperatives to, kind of use some strategic leverage, pool some stuff, fund some stuff, but that's like even beyond institutional capital and other sources of capital, which should also be interested.
Dude, this is why we need a school of investing instead of schools of business, because actually finding the capital to fund these collectives, to unlock capital for these projects, like you really need to be creative and expert.
It's not chill. It's not chill at all.
It's not an easy project.
Yeah, and like so much of the way that one would go about it is just based on like random connections, people friendships you've accumulated, whatever, like stuff that's not Googleable.
Yeah.
Which means it's like kind of, I guess rarefied or restricted knowledge in a way.
Yeah.
Which sucks.
Yeah, like I was asking a bunch of smart people the other day, like very smart people. I was like, do you know the difference between a defined benefit pension and a defined contribution pension and like what it implies in terms of a portfolio? And they were like, what are we defining? Like, what is this defined? And it's like, interesting. Okay, so there are these pensions. Some of them promise you an amount of money till you die, and that's promised by the sponsor. And so they manage the contributions and investing. And then there are these other pensions where it's just contributions and investment returns, and there's no promise. And they're like, oh, that's interesting. What do I have? And it's like, you don't even know what you have?
We used to have it great.
Yeah.
Everyone had a defined benefit. Yeah.
But the funny thing is, I'm like, you almost certainly have a defined contribution plan because you don't work for the government,
Yep.
So what's hard for you? I should ask you. I'm not being a good guest here.
Well, you're not a guest. You're a host.
What am I doing? Host.
Yeah. Come on. Don't give yourself a demotion. I'd say honestly, like, so I went to my sister's bachelorette. That's why I was traveling. It was incredible. It was like the first actual vacation type thing I've taken in 3 years.
Wow.
And like it coming back in is just like, I mean, taking any time off is just chaos. Like I came back to like a foot of unopened mail, like 200 emails just from people who had specific questions for me that required thought, all of that. And like, it's sort of like, oh, my past has caught up with me, but it's like, I feel like the dog that caught the car a little bit where, it's, we now have this really interesting thing that I wanted so much to be a real thing, and now it's a real thing.
Amazing.
But holy shit, is there, I mean, I feel like with children, when they grow up, they get more and more independent, which just doesn't seem to be the way that companies work, at least in my experience.
You have to, I mean, it's a little bit like children in that you actually need to force it. Like you're like,
so
I'm not going to make you a lunch today. So if you're going to eat lunch, you got to do it. You have to build the processes. You have to hire the people. You need to be ready to give it up. That's the hard thing when it's your company. Like,
exactly. Yeah. It's like I mean, I'm glad I didn't call it like Sloan Ortel Asset Management, because then it would be like, I am dying on this hill.
Yes, you are.
But I'd probably die on this hill anyway.
One other thought before you go. I used to liken this, what you're experiencing on your vacation, because I used to be a cyclist. And for me, the best analogy here is when people need to use the bathroom when they're in the Tour de France.
Yep.
They sprint off the front like if they're attacking the peloton. They sprint way out in front, then they pull off and they like go into a bush.
Yep.
And then they run back to their bike, they jump on and they just get back onto the back of the peloton. That's what it feels like when you're an entrepreneur taking a vacation. You have to sprint ahead. You're doing all your work.
Yep.
There's no such thing as time off. All you're doing is getting ahead of the peloton so that you can take time to like have a break.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're putting on that out of office, knowing exactly that you're, how much you're going to be paying off in the future.
Yeah, you either need to sprint later to get back to the peloton, or you had to sprint ahead so that you can, but the peloton's carrying on, right?
Yeah. Fortunately, it still feels important, which I think is that's the thing that matters, right? But I know you've had kind of a tough week, Ash. So
this is going to cheer me up.
I want to spice things up for you. Yeah.
It still gives me goosebumps. I think because we've been doing this for 7 or 8 years.
Yep. Yeah. No, I mean, we actually have been doing this for 5 years.
Amazing.
It was nuts.
Yeah.
And go us, go listeners, go the world, whatever.
We for a moment, the format of the show was going to be you and me just calling random people. Because I can remember being at a long game WeWork in like 2016, 17.
Yep.
And we were just going to prank call people and just record it. Jerky Boys style.
Turns out the prank was the friends we made along the way. To the friends listening along, the Dear Ashby segment is written by you. It's your questions that come into freemoneypod@gmail.com, or they, come in responses to our Substack, or, somehow you find Ashby at Stanford and stuff a piece of paper into his hands and then run away furtively. That's happened, right?
Crumple it up and throw it at me.
Yeah. Exactly.
All you got to say is, that's a Dear Ashby, and I will stop and pick it up.
Yeah, and actually, I think this first question came that
somebody crumpled paper and threw it at you, Ashby, right?
Well, so yeah, I mean, this question was, so you sort of revealed yourself as constructive about AI in the last episode.
I did. I guess you're right. Yeah, I was coming off of some interesting meetings, and then I was like, oh, maybe this is going to be good.
Yeah. I mean, and I think the thing could catch on, but in your neighborhood, this fellow Mark Andreessen, who I don't know if you've heard of him.
I've heard of him.
I've had him blocked on Twitter for like 10 years. He's a character.
He's a character, and I think he's a big owner of Twitter.
Yeah. Good for him.
Yeah, so that's been a great investment, I'm sure.
Worst syndicated deal in the history of syndicated loans.
Yeah.
So Mark Andreessen is now saying AI can save comedy.
Right.
And I actually wrote a piece on this for CFA Institute. Like, when, computers can write actual funny jokes, then we'll know they're in for it. Do you think that this AI can save comedy thing has any legs to it?
First of all, I don't think comedy needs saving right now. Like, I find myself laughing out loud all the frickin' time. And more than ever, like, these YouTube shorts, whatever your brand of comedy, you can find so much comedy. It's like a paradise for people who like comedy right now.
It's a comedy boom, literally. I mean, it's like, it feels like the late 80s in terms
the
of
rise of these short TV shows. Now, you can tell me that like the homogenization of media has become a big problem, and we're not getting the like Billy Madison style, old school Wedding Crashers style comedy anymore. But I don't think that's what, Mark Andreessen is wringing his hands about. I think he thinks he's not laughing at jokes anymore, and so he's hoping AI will finally figure out what makes him laugh.
That's such a sad mental model of.
I do ask ChatGPT to tell me jokes frequently ever since ChatGPT created this audio thing where you can click it and you can just talk to ChatGPT. Yep. I should do that in French. I'd use it, speak French at the ChatGPT.
Yeah, you were saying, yeah.
But I want to tell you a joke it told me the other day because it was so fun. I thought it was funny, but now I'm maybe making it seem too funny. ChatGPT, I said, tell me a funny joke. And I'm going to see if I can remember it. I forgot to write it down perfectly. It was, My wife drew her eyebrows on too high, and I told her she was surprised. No, she looked surprised. Right. And so the joke, which I've just failed to deliver, is like the eyebrows being high makes you look surprised,
Yeah,
And
it's like kind of like an anti-joke.
it's an anti-joke, but it's just actually I was like, think about the kind of setup and like the way the punchline hits. You're like, that's pretty thoughtful.
It's pretty sophisticated.
Yeah.
Like I mean, like the classic anti-joke is like a man walks into a bar, his drinking problem is ruining his family.
Right.
Yeah. But this is like, yeah, it's kind of a skewered setup, and I mean, yeah, I'll have
it's
to
getting
revisit.
good, right?
Yeah.
And what do we expect? Like these systems are painting, they're writing poems. Like at a certain point, the jokes are going to get complex.
Yeah.
And my wife, by the way, doesn't draw her eyebrows on, but you can almost picture it, right? Like,
oh yeah. Yeah, like I'm blessed with too many eyebrows to draw them on, but
no, you got a lot. I've got a lot to work with myself.
Yeah, you got the inverse problem. That and laziness. But anyway, yeah. So that's another.
So I don't think comedy needs saving. Was my
But
my
you're
answer
still bullish
to your
on
question.
AI.
I'm still bullish on AI's comedy genius. Yeah.
Yeah, and not the stocks, but the long-term potential of it, probably. Like I doubt you're out here being like all bulled up on Nvidia.
No, I'm not an owner. I mean, I guess through an index fund.
So the next question comes from one that I actually got while I was talking to a group, and I thought it was really interesting to chew on for us here. Why are people divesting from Israel instead of just thoughtfully investing in Palestine?
So let's take a step back and think about what investors are doing. They are pricing risk and they're getting paid for managing that risk. And so investors love risk. So people are like, oh, why are you taking all that risk? Investors their job is taking risk. Just for like our listeners that don't live and breathe finance, there is no return without risk.
Yeah, there's nothing not risky at all.
Exactly. Investors hate this thing, which is very different than risk, called uncertainty. They hate it. Okay. And war is nothing if not uncertainty. And so it's really difficult to think about how you could manage an investment program in kind of a conflict zone, like Ukraine, like, the Palestine territories, Israel, et cetera, where you look at it and you're like, I don't know what to invest in, or I don't know who to, maybe you could go in and find, micro lending to people for something, but you wouldn't want to buy real estate. I mean, I don't think right now.
Yeah. And like the Palestinian Stock Exchange has like 48 companies on it. There are 10 brokers that can access it. These are the largest companies in the territory, and like, I think the largest one might have a market cap of 300 million, which would make it categorically too small for even my weird ass thing. And I get to make up the rules.
It's your thing. Like you could change the rule.
Yeah, like I can change the rules, but there's not a way I could change the rules to make that work.
Right.
And yeah, it's like, it's so interesting. I'm glad I brought this into here because you answered that in a totally different way than I did.
Oh, yeah.
Like, because you went to the theory, and I went straight to supply.
Oh, right.
And I didn't make that distinction between risk and uncertainty, which I think is so, like, I mean, you could teach a whole class on that.
It's really why capital hasn't made it into Africa. I'll just say it. So a lot of pension funds are always looking at emerging markets, and they'll put their toe into different Asian economies. But then you're like, why are you doing Africa? Like, think about this entire continent that needs energy. But they haven't managed to get comfort around the uncertainties. They don't understand what are the drivers of value, what are the risks they need to worry about, and ultimately, this is why you saw MIGA, Multilateral Insurance Guarantee Agency. Am I getting it right? I can't remember.
I don't even know what you're talking about.
This is a subsidiary of one of the big, it might be World Bank, MIGA. And it's about providing some form of a guarantee around issues like geopolitical issues, like war, where you're sort of saying, look, there are uncertainties, but let's build this insurance program through MIGA that's like covering you for what they call in contracts acts of God.
Yep,
They still
got
put
it.
that in contracts, by the way.
Oh yeah. Like we in our client agreement, we can use force majeure.
There you go, force majeure, acts of God.
Yeah.
But investors don't like those things, and
No.
so you want to get rid of them. And that's what Migo was doing in the developing economies to try to attract investors in. If there's a coup, last thing you want to attract investors is to have a coup in your country. All right, well,
Yep.
how do we protect against coups? There's an insurance policy for that. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes.
I feel like there's part of it too is just the path dependency of markets and economies, right? Where like the way that things have been in the past dictates the scope of possibility in the present and the future. And if you're growing from a small base, it's damn hard to just spring into a new reality. And also investing is a third order thing, right? There's humanitarian stuff, there's real world stuff. Once you can't even think about investing until you can think 3 months in the future.
Totally.
So
I think people sometimes fail to realize that, Sloan, that investing is like a time machine. Like if you can't picture yourself in a place in time 3 months to 3 years from now, you've got no business investing, right? You have to be able to set a series of assumptions about the future. And there are certain places right now where it's really hard to do.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, some of them are in the US. Okay, so the last question I think is somebody who's just teeing you up.
Beauty.
The New Zealand Sovereign Wealth Fund has racked up a really impressive track record. What's their secret? What's going on there?
First and foremost, I get to plug my paper called The Investor Identity. Let's go talk about the investor identity. Which is about understanding the comparative advantages and weaknesses of any investment organization. And it's on the basis of your identity that you start to formulate your organizational strategy, your asset allocation, your portfolio implementation. And then only after you have your org, your allocation, and your implementation in place, do you start to feel the performance emerge and figure out if you got your identity right and dialed.
Yep.
And so in New Zealand, clearly they understand themselves and they have built an asset allocation and implementation that reflects that organizational identity. In their case, it's good governance, double arm's length approach to governance structures. And it is a sustainability lens that is second to none, which pushes them to take a very long-term view. They really believe in keeping things aligned, in quotes, which is another way of saying avoiding paying unnecessary fees to managers and agents. But where they drive significant outperformance is through portfolio tilting. So that's a way of saying dynamic or tactical asset allocation. They run a total portfolio approach in New Zealand, which has since, you could say it's been copied or it's been implemented at CalPERS and Future Fund and other places. New Zealand was one of the first to design a total portfolio approach. And so that served them very well to move between risks that are going out of favor in the market into risks that are going into favor.
And just to kind of like translate that into into English for the homies. Like when we talk about total portfolio approach, and I'm just gonna paraphrase this and tell me if I'm making it up. Basically, what I understand from that is they're saying, all right, these are the things we want to own, right? Like we have a we have this concept of a total portfolio. We know what it should be, but it's not always going to be exactly right in all situations, right? And so in instances where stocks are overvalued or there are lots of risks, we'll reduce our relative proportion of stocks that we're holding or hedge away it or do something to control it so that we can manage those risks. So they're thinking both about their long-term objective of what they want to own 50 years in the future, and then about the short-term wiggles, like the market's a messy bitch. We all know that. And they're just basically incorporating that messiness into their, kind of ongoing tactics.
That's right. That's right. There might be a slightly simpler way of describing it, which is to say the normal investment organizations has product buckets
Yep.
And the chief investment officer's job is to say, here's 100% of the portfolio. Call that my giant water jug. And then I'm going to pour some of my water jug into your bucket. You're the head of private equity. You get 10% of my jug. That is now 100% of your bucket. Go invest it.
Got it.
That bucket-based mentality where buckets represent product categories is very common. And the reason it's common is it's very hard to hire human beings to work in a total portfolio system. You hire people who have expertise in the products, infrastructure, real estate, venture capital, private equity. And so you will often see organizations like literally try to hire people into product categories and have a top of the house that's total portfolio and figure out a way to translate it all around.
Yep.
Often a total portfolio will be built based on a factor-based asset allocation.
Fancy
and the
math.
product teams are like, anywho. Everything you said was right. It's just the way I'm describing it.
I like the way that because that's more social than what I was talking about. Like I was, I kind of do some of this, and so I was sort of thinking about it from my perspective, where it's like I don't want to own that right now, but I'll own it later. You're
like the prices seem off on this, and when interest rates are high, this is no good. I'll come back to it in a year, whenever.
I just sold 3 stocks I love because the valuations are bad. And I will happily buy them again higher if I'm wrong.
And so what you just brought up, let's finish the thought on the social, which is to say you're a one-person band, right? Or you've got a couple of people working on your team. So you're not worried about this like 40-person team around you. Now imagine you're, let's say, New Zealand Seaper. You have 100 people on a team. And instead of a stock being overvalued, you have an asset class. And now that team is like, what are we supposed to be doing for 2 years?
Yeah, exactly.
You're like,
fuck me, I guess.
Your job is to find times to sell. And you're like, but I do deals. And you're like, not this year. So that's hard. That's like where people struggle with this total portfolio approach to investing is like, you've got these brilliant, often highly paid people that you're saying, no deals for you.
Yep. Yeah, you go hang out in the garage. And I just love that the New Zealand fund calls their staff guardians.
That's the board.
The board? Oh, that's the board.
It's Space Force that calls their the Space Force are all guardians, I think.
New Zealand's very far away, as you know. So
what do they call the space? Like instead of cadets, it's like guardians or something,
very sci-fi.
By the way, how big of a budget do you think Space Force has now? Annual budget?
$35 million.
Was it an M or a B?
An M.
Oh no, 30 billion.
Oh, you're talking about not the Netflix show. You're talking about the.
The actual Space Force. They canceled that Netflix show. They canceled it. By the way, that was one of the greatest shows ever, and I can't believe they canceled it, but they did.
Yeah, John Malkovich. Come on, John Malkovich and Steve Carell. But like that. Wow. So
Space Force is becoming a real thing. I know we're going off topic here, but like there's war in space that's now being contemplated because like Russians put up some satellite and like Chinese are doing stuff, and we've got people on the moon. My favorite line from the Space Force show now is "Boots on the moon."
We'll get to the garden tip in a second. I just want to plug one more sci-fi series because we do that around here.
Yeah,
For All Mankind. You watching this?
Oh, I loved it. I haven't watched this latest season on Mars.
Oh,
is it still good?
It's still good. It's not like but that it is a literal teasing out of exactly what we're talking about, wars in space.
It is. Yeah.
You got to love an alternative history.
It's so cool. Let's not ruin it, but like the very first episode, you're like, what?
Yeah. It's it's the same team who did Battlestar Galactica.
Oh, okay.
So as always, it's the Mormons behind all the good sci-fi. Never forget it. But you
guys are very creative. The Mormons have a lot of creativity. They make make good stories.
Well, yeah, it helps that our holy texts are, anyway.
Anywho.
But so what you got for me in the garden tips department?
I have a cop out, which was to say, don't hurt your neck.
I too have been neglecting my garden of late.
It's so I feel terrible because I actually had a decent tip in mind today. But now after hearing like the whole regenerative ag story from today, I'm like, I'm embarrassed to say my tip. But I want you to know, I had Chinese rosebuds. I'm trying to think what it's. There's another name for them, but I have these 4 in my backyard, and they're just amazing. They're climbing vines, and 3 of them are like going up and over an archway. Is so beautiful. Honestly, I'll send you a picture. You'll be blown away.
Please, yeah.
And but one of them was dying, and so I'll tell you, I bought some Miracle-Gro. I'm embarrassed to say. And within a month, that plant had completely come back to life and was like, I don't know what's in Miracle-Gro. It's blue. It's not natural. Okay.
NPK, baby, nitrogen, potassium. We didn't even talk about that when we were talking about the
all the stuff.
It's a petroleum product.
Is it Miracle-Gro?
Yeah.
It's petroleum.
Yeah, it's basically it's a petrochemical.
Okay, it's in a pot. It's not seeping into the ground. Don't get mad at me. Don't hate on me.
I'm not getting mad at you, but like the interesting thing is like, in pretty much all of the marginal agricultural spaces, the only reason that anyone's getting fed off of domestic production is nitrogen-based fertilizer.
Yeah.
Which are inextricably linked to the oil and gas ecosystem.
Right.
Right. So
they used to get fertilizer from bat dung. Yep. I think guana.
They fought wars over it.
They did off the coast of is it Colombia or anyway? South America. They were fighting wars over this stuff.
Yeah, fertilizer is important, but yeah, hey, in a pinch, I've used Miracle-Gro too. I'll admit it.
But it was wild. I'm not trying to plug this, the petroleum industry. But so here's what we got to go figure out for next time: is to what is a natural version of Miracle-Gro, so you're not taking blue crystals and putting it in liquid.
Compost tea.
It's just compost.
Compost tea.
Oh, tea.
So when you're, if you have a compost pile,
I do.
Especially, I feel like with your kids, you got to have a worm bin at some point.
We compost.
I'm just going to send you 2,000 unsolicited worms.
Wow, that sounds great.
Yeah, just a worm extravaganza. But worm bins in particular create a lot of liquidy runoff that you can then filter, strain, and then is a great fertilizer. Your compost will do it too. You could take the compost, put it in water, and then create compost tea. You can also, in some cases, take certain weeds and stuff that are growing around and use it to make compost tea. Just kind of leave it in water for a couple days.
Okay. Beauty.
Yeah. It's really pretty hot shit. Worm poop is also great, but maybe not as.
I'll just take some of my worm poop then. And use that.
They're coming in the mail, man. I got you.
One other thing though, before I give up my mic on my my garden tip proud father moment was when my son's bio class, they were all making terrariums, and you have to seal the terrarium, and so the class project is she takes your terrarium, it sits in a kind of a closed cupboard for a month with sun. And if your thing has still survived, you pass the project. If it's died, you have to do it again. And you can try as many times as you want, but you don't pass the project until you've made something live for a month. And Henry came back and he was like, I've hacked this, Dad. And I'm like, what? He's like, I'm doing mint. And I was like,
he's an evil genius.
He's an evil genius. You can't kill mint. I've been trying to kill mint forever in my backyard. He's like, oh, we're doing mint. And it's, doesn't even matter what I do, Oh
my God.
Isn't that genius?
Don't let him anywhere near a private equity fund.
So he planted mint. I helped him do it. And it was it looked awesome. And I know he's going to pass. You can't kill mint.
Yeah.
Nothing can kill mint.
That is absolute genius. Like that. I love, just very narrow satisfaction of the terms of the contract.
Yeah, exactly. You just need the plant to survive.
Wow. Tell Henry I'm proud of him. That's incredible.
I will.
My tip is, so I actually didn't realize I had done this in this way until I got on, so I say to all of my clients, I invest the way that I garden.
Right.
Right. And to me, that means 85 things. Right. And so I got on TikTok and I made a video, and then I found myself sitting in my clover patch.
Huh?
Right. So, basically, last year we killed the parking strips, replaced them with wildflowers. But I couldn't get to this basically like orange patch of earth, right? This is Utah, heavy clay soil, we're not dealing with the fertile loamy anything.
Right.
So I was like, we don't have enough compost to cover this. We don't have enough whatever. What do I do? So I got these pelletized clover seeds that were kind of set up to, and that's basically just like coating that helps the seed find purchase in the in the ground. And just kind of threw them down on this kind of 8x8 patch, and now I have a beautiful 2 foot tall
No way.
thing of clover. And the thing that's really crazy about it is that clover's a wildflower. We're trying to rewild places. Like if you've ever tried to plant wildflowers, they'll grow in patchy and they'll kind of look like a 14-year-old's beard for the first 5 years. And so basically what I do now is I go out when I'm walking around the garden and I grab a bunch of the now mature clover seeds off of this patch, and then I walk over to the blank areas and I just throw it down.
And are those actually taking hold, even though those aren't coated?
They're not as efficiently yet. I need to do some research into that, and maybe it's that they just won't germinate until next year. But I've thrown down a lot of seed.
Yeah.
But yeah, like it's a really cool and powerful thing. It's kind of like having a cash flowing portion of your portfolio.
Yeah.
That offsets the portion that needs continuous investment. Which is what I found myself talking about live on TikTok. And then be like, wow, that was like shit. That was smart of me, I guess.
Anyway,
do that.
By the way, I turned my garden bed where I was doing tomatoes into a redwood and sequoia seedling farm. And so right now, I'll send you a picture.
Yeah,
I have
give
probably 15 baby sequoias that are between 4 inches and a foot.
I love a sapling.
Yeah. It's so rad. The other thing is, because I've been doing some watering, because we put in a bunch of trees down our little mountain hill, the acorns falling off the oak tree, walk down there, there's like 14 baby oaks growing. It's like insane.
Yeah, I mean, it really is crazy. I mean, I've noticed so much of that same stuff happening with the there were places that looked really terrible when I left for my sister's bachelorette. Now we've got beautiful cosmos flowers growing into those spaces. No effort on my part.
Yeah. It's almost like once you get these systems, now for us, it's water, right? So why are those 14 little oaks growing or whatever they are? It's because I had to get watering into the trees I was planting because we need that. And so, that's not a natural watering frame. But then all of a sudden, once there's water in the ground, this stuff grows like crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. And it just kicks off. And then, you see like, there's insects that have certain relationships with certain things. It's beautiful.
It's fun.
And, by the way, I thought the hummingbirds thing was a crock of shit when I started planting wildflowers. Like, I didn't believe that I would actually get them. We've gotten a couple now, and they fly right up against my office window.
Dude, I had a hummingbird come up and say thank you to me live the other day because I think that hummingbird likes all the trees we planted. We have so many hummingbirds all of a sudden. Isn't it amazing? Wow. Like you almost don't want to I didn't say that when he was talking about it either, because I was like, people are going to think I'm just.
I made a hummingbird too.
Yeah, exactly. Like I have hummingbirds, but the reality is,
don't even act like I don't have hummingbird friends.
I have hummingbird friends, and they come over and they're like, "This is sick. What have you done with the place?" And it's like, but it's fun. It's rewarding.
It's literally a moment where, when I got my face surgery, related to gender transition, I going into it, everyone says it's medically necessary.
Right.
Going into it, I was like, yeah, whatever, I'll play along with that. Right. And then you get to the other side of it, 7 days after, I look in the mirror and I'm like, holy crap, I'm not itchy when I look at myself, and I didn't even realize I was itchy before. Right. I feel like with this native biodiversity thing, it's a lot of stuff like that where it's like, you can't possibly be living this Pocahontas bullshit
And then you do it, and you're
and then
like,
you do it,
this is
and you're like,
amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Show me all the colors of the wind, man.
Yeah.
I mean, like, that's a good reference.
I love that. Well played.
Yeah, everyone knows that. Anyway,
Yeah.
do you have anything more to say?
That's
to
it.
these good
No,
folks?
this is a long one. Hopefully somebody hung in here.
Love you, especially
Love you,
you,
bye.
the single listener. Bye.
Yeah, the one listener. We love you. Bye.
I'm looking like money. Now make it rain on 'em.